Hello everyone, this is CounterYolo, bringing you another video talking about Star Trek Online. And in this video, I'm going to go over science abilities today. Simply because, well, this is the third part of that series, and, well, we have a lot of abilities that we're going to be going over today. I've already covered tactical and engineering previously on the channel. If you haven't caught those yet, feel free to see the link in the description or just on the channel page to go to that whole playlist. Also, as have been commented on the other two videos, I'm not perfect, and I do make some errors during these videos. So if there's something that might be unclear or weird, just check the comments, and there's probably going to be something there talking about it. Other than that, let's go ahead and get started with Science Bridge Officer abilities. And of course, we're featuring our science stuff here because, of course, for the canon Star Trek captains, it is a Romulan science captain that is our canon captain that I'll get into more in January and February. Our first ability is Hazard Emitters, alphabetically, and this is one of the abilities that I highly recommend that all captains use. This is a heal over time, but it also has a pretty good hazard removal on it. It does have some damage resistance rating that scales with your Ox power and EPG, but honestly, it's really that heal over time that and a hazard debuff is really where the value of this really comes in. In my opinion, the lower ranks, either rank 1 or rank 2, is completely sufficient. You don't need to get rank 3 of this. Just rank 1 or rank 2 is best overall for this. Our next one is Jam Target Sensors. This is one that is one of the couple of menace abilities in PvP. Back when I used to do PvP in a more competitive setting, this was one of the abilities that was banned from being used in a lot of PvP circles, just because of the placate effect, which a lot of people don't like to have. Plus, with this particular ability, if you have this starship trait, it also adds an AoE disable to enemies, along with more damage once the placate effect goes away, either through actual damage or through just the duration. Which disables are also kind of annoying in PvP as well. So honestly, I am not a PvP science captain ever inside of Star Trek Online, so I can't really tell you what rank would be best for the ability if you're going to use it in PvP. Probably some people can probably tell you if you're curious and ask them yourself. But it's definitely one of the more annoying ones inside the game. Don't use this in PvE, it's not really that effective. Our next one is Mask Energy Signature. This is also a PvP specific one. This is quite simply an ability to have a cloak on your starship. That's basically all it is. The higher ranks slightly increases the stealth rating, but honestly, just use Ensign for this if you're going to do PvP and are going to be using, for instance, a Federation starship that doesn't have a cloak on it. You easily just slot this ability into an Ensign Science slot, and you have a cloak. Now, it's true that if you're going to do that, you're losing one of your bridge officer abilities out of your combat stuff. So there is that. You're going to be a little bit weaker in combat versus other players, but at least you could basically have a cloak-like effect to try to sneak up on the other enemies on the other team. Also, this is not a battle cloak. This is just a regular cloak. So you have that to worry about too. Our next one is Polarize Hull. A lot of your DPS players and also PvP players really like this ability because it gives you immunity to tractor beams and to teleports. The immunity to tractor beams is really the more important thing because, especially for a lot of your DPS players, when they get in trouble and they're about to die, they'll use their maneuverability to move out of combat, either in PvP or in PvE if that actually happens to be the case and you don't want to die. Tractor beams will stop that from you being able to leave really easily, especially NPC tractor beams. If you have Polarized Hull, you'll be able to stop that. Now, because I am a tank captain, I'm okay being tractored. It's really bad for me to say that, but as a tank captain, if I'm getting tractored, okay, that's cool. That means my allies aren't getting targeted, and that's totally fine by me. Um, because of the aspect, I'm not sure what rank is really best. The damage resistance rating off of this is actually pretty substantial as well, and it scales really well with auxiliary power. Because I'm doing all these abilities and showing these clips of these abilities on the ground, this is with no auxiliary power at all, and it still is giving a substantial damage resistance rating for it. Obviously, if you have higher ranks of this, that's even higher, and then the auxiliary power to it will scale even higher than that. So it does give you substantial damage resistance rating and immunity to tractor beams, which some of your DPS players are really going to like inside of this game. Our next ability is Science Team. It's another really highly recommended ability to use. I can't always fit it into my tank builds, but when I can, I will. It is just an instant heal, and it also removes science debuffs on you for a few seconds. There are some really bad science debuffs, like in this list that I've been starting to go over, that are really, really bad and really, really annoying. Science Team is your best counter against that, especially if you're not a science captain and don't have a lot of resists to a lot of those science effects. Science Team is definitely your friend. And as it says here, it can be activate even if you're held or disabled. It's one of the few abilities that can actually be activated during that to get you out of it. Especially for your DPS builds, this can be a lifesaver in really dire situations, especially in PvP where you could be disabled, held, placated fairly frequently. This is your go-to ability to get out of those situations. Next ability is Structural Analysis. I don't use this because this is mainly a science DPS type of thing. Science tanks and other DPS people aren't really going to be using this too much because you need a deteriorating secondary deflector to be able to optimally use this thing effectively, which really only science DPS guys are really going to have. Your science tanks, a lot of them probably can't afford to use a deteriorating secondary deflector unless they have a science dreadnought or a science spearhead is what it's called now, not Vanguard, but spearhead. Combined with the number of science abilities that you need in order to be able to want to have this thing inside of it. But it's a damage resistance rating debuff on enemies that will start to spread to additional targets that are really close to it. So like if you had this plus gravity well that I'll talk about later in the video, this could be extremely potent to stack with that as well. Depending upon the rank of it, the higher the rank, the longer the duration of this and the spreading. So I'm not a science DPS captain. I can't really tell you what rank would be best. I think a lot of it just depends upon your ship and the other stuff on your ship. Next ability is Subspace Vortex. This is one you get off of the exchange. You can't actually train this one without lockbox stuff. In my opinion, of all the science stuff, this is a really, really good buy from the exchange, honestly. Depending upon your build, you might just have rank 1 or a higher rank depending upon what you're doing. It is pretty good AoE damage that stacks with like Gravity Well and other stuff. And it's up fairly frequently too. This is one of the weird abilities that in my testing, it didn't seem to lower the cooldown even if you had multiple of these things. The cooldown seems to be the exact same between if you have multiple of these. So just put one of them on your ship to whatever rank that you would want to have it at. I'm sure there's probably someone in the comments that'll probably say what rank is the best one for this ability. Or at least eventually people probably will. The next ability is Tachyon Beam. This is really good for drain builds. I mean, drain builds kind of like are basically built around this type of ability, and abilities like this one. But additionally, this is also really good while you're leveling up, especially before you get to a tier 4 starship. Tachyon Beam is exceptionally effective versus most of the weaker enemies inside the game, because they don't really have resistance to drain until you start getting a little bit higher and start facing debris. Again, if you actually face the debris at super low levels, you also would be able to take them down pretty easily with Tachyon Beam. So, and you wouldn't need a secondary deflector to use Tachyon Beam effectively until you get to really high levels. This is a really good ability. Like if you're like below level 30, basically you use Tachyon Beam once and it almost completely takes out the shields of an enemy that you're fighting, which means that your torpedoes, which also are effective at at that level, will also destroy enemies really quickly. It's not until you get to higher levels in which torpedoes become less effective, in which Tachyon Beam would also become a little bit less effective for those typical types of builds. It's still great for drain builds at the high end. Drain builds are a little bit more of the support type playstyle, honestly, at the really high end, but it can also be really, really annoying too. So, just stuff to think about overall. So yeah, like for those of you that like just starting the game, Tachyon Beam at low levels is very good. It is very good. So don't worry too much about that. Our next ability is Tractor Beam. Because of a particular duty officer that I'll show later in this video, Tractor Beam isn't quite as good as another ability which puts it on cooldown called Tractor Beam Repulsors. However, this one is available at Ensign rank. This one you can't use until Lieutenant rank, so this one still could technically be a little bit better because you don't have to use a higher level slot for it. It's really good for science players in the game as well as tanks, because if you're tractoring someone, you're basically the most threatening thing on them. Technically, it disables Cloak as well, so in that tiny vein of thought, it's also good in PvP a little bit. But it's mainly to keep enemies inside of your AoE damage for science characters. For tanks, you can use Tractor Beam on a really important enemy that might be potentially starting to attack an ally that you don't want to have them attack, and you use Tractor Beam, and now they're going to be stuck attacking you. Or at least highly likely to be attacking you because you have a lot of damage and control coming from a Tractor Beam. Tractor Beam repulsors are typically quite a bit superior, though, in most veins of thought inside of Star Trek Online, and I'll be showing that off later in this video. The last ability for the Ensign rank is Transfer Shield Strength. Funny enough, this also puts Feedback Pulse on cooldown, which yeah, I think is kind of interesting. But anyway, this is very much for survivability. I like this a lot because first off, it's one of the few bridge officer abilities that gives you shield resistance, which is really nice. Plus, it gives you shield regeneration for 15 seconds to every single one of your facings. This is really low just because you're on ground, and space is still not that high, but it's still shield healing per second to your starship. That's extreme. Like, shield healing per second is really rare inside Star Trek Online. It's really Transfer Shield Strength and a starship trait called Non-Linear Progression. Do you really see that fairly often? Outside of those abilities, it's mainly your passive healing every 6 seconds to your shields, and then just shield heals themselves, that you're able to heal your shields more. It does give a tiny shield heal initially on an initial activation too, but it's really for that extra shield resistance, and that shield healing per second is why I like to use it as a tank captain. Also for your science captains, this scales really, really well with Aux power. So, and also amplified with shield healing stuff. So if you're a science captain and have really high auxiliary power, this is actually going to be, on average, about equivalent to emergency power to shields in terms of its shield resistance and shield regeneration to you. So like, don't discount this just because like you want to stack a lot of other science DPS stuff in your science abilities. This thing is a very potent thing for survival too. Our next ability is Charged Particle Burst. This is another one that's mainly for PvP builds, but can also be used for drain builds too, because it also has a shield resistance debuff to enemies as well, and it's a huge amount of enemies. It's really that high because it also can affect your pets, like whenever you're fighting against carriers and stuff. This can hurt like everything. It also disables cloaks for a few seconds. The moment you ever see cloak disables and stuff inside of abilities, and for being integral for a lot of those abilities, it means that it's probably designed for PvP over anything else. Especially against people like me, who as a battle cloak tank on my main PvP character now, when I get in trouble, I use the Romulan battle cloak to try to get out. If someone used this at that point, then I couldn't use my cloak to escape, and I could probably die. Yeah, this is pretty nice, especially because depending upon the rank, the higher the rank, the longer the duration. If you're a really support person in PvP, you could potentially like stop people from ever escaping with this plus other things going on. But anyway, next ability is Destabilizing Resonance Beam. This is from a mission, which means that this is very easily accessible. I don't know its minimum cooldown. The cooldown, from what I've been able to tell, is around 90 seconds. I could easily be wrong, and it could be much lower than that. I am not 100% sure on this one. I'm sure people in the comments will probably give me a different number, and that's totally fine. This is pretty nice because, first of all, it does damage. Plus, it lowers damage resistance rating and the outgoing energy damage from an enemy. And if you happen to get the full 10 stacks on someone, it will disable their weapons for a few seconds too. That's not very often it'll do that because you often kill most of your targets before the end of that 10 stacks, but it's possible. Especially on your really tough enemies, and hey, getting your weapons offline on a really tough enemy that your team's trying really hard to kill is a good plus. Obviously, EVPG and Control gives you higher stuff for the damage and also for the subsystem offline aspect of this ability. So that's really nice there. Next ability is Energy Siphon. Of course, an ability that steals power and gives it to yourself is going to be great for drain builds. It's not quite as good as it was in previous iterations, but it's still decent. Your drain builds are still going to like to have Energy Siphon on their ship. This is one of the big things that the Breen enemies will do to you. Keep in mind, there are two good abilities that you can use to counter Energy Siphon if someone's trying to drain your power. And that's Hazard Emitters and Science Team. Both of these guys easily counter Energy Siphon. So if you're having troubles against the Breen for some reason, use one of those abilities when they're draining you, and you'll be just fine. All right, let's go on to the next one, which is Feedback Pulse. This is mainly used for tanks. Prior to Season 13, this was one of the best situations where you could use Feedback Pulse really well with Command Track Fire and actually do a really large amount of damage. Nowadays, it's quite a bit less powerful. The Romulan MC consoles were also nerfed into the ground. Combined with the fact that our hardest hitting enemies in the game now also don't deal energy damage. The main damage that's hurting us substantially in the elite content inside the game in space is torpedoes and mines. So, and that stuff is not affected at all by Feedback Pulse, because Feedback Pulse only harnesses energy weapon attacks directed against you. If it's a torpedo, a mine, science abilities that do kinetic or physical damage, it's not going to be sent back to enemies through Feedback Pulse. So keep that in mind. It's a lot less viable in today's tanking because of all those factors. Plus, it also has a cooldown stuff with Pressure Shield Strength, which is a really good tanking survival ability too. So, a couple little points there as well. Our next ability is Photonic Officer. So one of the big changes to this ability and the SEO wiki is outdated in this aspect, by the way. The Photonic Officer, back in the day, like when I started Star Trek Online, the Photonic Officer used to only affect science bridge officer abilities. Nowadays, it actually affects all bridge officer abilities besides itself. Okay? And then, by the way, if you can't have two Photonic Officers because you'll still have the exact same cooldown for the most part. I see this best to be used if you're going to do a budget science build without any duty officers whatsoever. Basically, if you want something akin to an Octobat build, but you don't want to invest in duty officers at all, like a budget build that I might show off on this channel in a couple of weeks for science, this is a decently viable bridge officer ability for you. Definitely at the high end, you're not going to use Photonic Officer, you're not going to see Photonic Officer. Octobat combined with other duty officers that reduce cooldowns are fairly more prevalent and nice to have instead of Photonic Officer, and do have a lot better cooldowns overall. So this is just for budget end stuff, and it's only when you have a lot of bridge officers. If you only have like 3 or 4, Photonic's not really going to be that valuable to take away one of your bridge officer slots just to cool down the rest of them. That's just me personally. There's also a possibility that after this video that Cryptic could change it again and make this just science again. It's possible. Because barely anyone uses this, I think that's why Cryptic changed it to have all bridge officer abilities recharge 30 to like 40 to 50 to 60, 70%. I think is what it is. 30, 15, 70, I think is what it is. For that 60 seconds. Just because no one's using this ability right now. Because Cryptic's added too many things for cooldowns that have made this thing completely obsolete in the game now. Besides budget and stuff. But anyway, our next ability is Scramble Sensors. This is the other extremely annoying PvP ability. So first off, this is an AoE confuse. I think I talked about this before, but in Star Trek Online, there's two main really annoying things that enemies can do to you. They can placate you, which if you're placated, that means that the source of whoever placated you cannot be targeted by you. You still have AoE abilities damage them, but your own ability, you cannot actually manually target them now. What AoE confuses do is it confuses your targeting sensor to constantly think that your allies are your enemies and your enemies are your allies. That also means a lot of your AoE abilities, unless I'm saying this, a lot of your AoE abilities that would normally damage your enemies now are going to be damaging your allies. It's a little chaotic, especially in PvP. It's really, really annoying. Combine the fact that if you combine this ability with this particular duty officer, which also lowers the recharge speed of your bridge officer abilities if you're hit with this thing by 50% per 10 seconds, it can be extremely annoying. Plus, if you had an Octobat build combined with this, you could basically have this every 30 seconds being hit by this, which means that effectively your cooldowns are now substantially longer. I'll just put it that way. Of all the combos in PvP, this is the most annoying for me personally to fight against, simply because, you know, if my bridge officer abilities are coming up slower, it means that a lot of my defensive capabilities, my bridge officers, are also going to be substantially slower too. Yeah, I do not like fighting in these types of maps with several people that are able to do this to me. It is true that if you're hit with a confuse or a placate, after it wears off, you're immune to those types of effects for a few seconds, but it's not very long. And if someone happens to hit you while you're immune, then you aren't going to be affected by it. You will still be affected by the bridge off or the duty officer stuff, but you won't be affected by the actual ability itself. So keep that in mind. Our next ability is Tachyon Beam Repulsors. Because of this duty officer right here is why this thing is really good. Normally, because it's called Repulsors, you're able to push away up to 3 enemies substantially far away from you. And it does a little bit of kinetic damage too, but it's mainly a pretty strong repel. Which considering like a lot of like your gravity well stuff, for instance, I'll talk about in a bit, is like negative like 0.2 or 0.3, 0.5. The fact that this has substantial numbers in repel without any bonuses to it, it's a very strong repel, guys. It's a very strong repel. Not strong as a repel later in this video, but it's a very strong repel. And then when you have this ability, which the repel is now a pull, it's a very, very strong pull. The pull is actually pretty similar to in a different console called multi-tractor arrays from the Sarcophagus chip. Or if you're a Federation like Romney, you can skip this route for the exchange for a couple 100,000 EC. That's kind of similar to Tachyon Beam Repulsors with this duty officer, but it's just a console. And it has a 2-minute cooldown instead of 40 seconds. But it's just something interesting. Tanks really like this stuff a lot, simply because in both modes, I mean, if you're trying to have an enemy attack you, you can use this duty officer, and that's great. If you're trying to defend a target, you can use your repulsors the normal way and push several enemies away from you, which is pretty potent and powerful. Just gonna throw that out there. Next ability is Tyken's Rift. It's our last ability that's available at Lieutenant. Our remaining 3 after this one are going to be Lieutenant Commander and higher. This is for science builds again, and I have nicknamed this basically the drain and non-pull version of Gravity Well. In my opinion, that's what this basically is. It's an AoE damage. That's a little less damage, but it does a decent amount of drain to enemies that are inside of it if you have really high drain. Otherwise, it's just, you know, another damaging AoE ability that you can do after you've launched off Gravity Well. By the way, these have a like 15-second or 20-second like lockout time between them, so you gotta make sure that you're timing these out accordingly, so that you don't use this and immediately want to use this afterwards, and you can't. So, just something to think about, guys and gals, everyone that's watching. So now we get to Gravity Well. This is the staple of a lot of science builds, honestly. In general, if you don't know what to put in your commander or lieutenant commander slots, Gravity Well is a very solid choice to put there. The other ones are almost situational. This is a very good ability to put there. Very, very good for science builds. Also, as for a lot of tank builds in general, having a Gravity Well in the lieutenant commander slot is very powerful. It does a lot of threat. I mean, it still does okay damage, but it's really more of that. You have a lot of control with this, even without doing a lot of stuff into control and EPG, like with just your skills. That's gonna be good enough. It's still gonna be doing a lot of threat. Keep in mind, it has a pretty long cooldown. You can lower this substantially with a service trade called Improved Gravity Well, which lowers this cooldown down by another 20 and increases the duration by 20, which means that it's already got it. Like with this trade alone, with Improved Gravity Well, you have a 50% uptime already. And then if you use 3 deflector duty officers or use Ox to Bat, you'll be able to get this to be up 100% of the time. Just as an FYI. When I do science builds and I have a commander slot, I always do Gravity Well 3. It's just really, really nice. Otherwise, I'll just use the lieutenant commander slot for a Gravity Well 1. I really, really like this ability. It's extremely good for science builds as well as for tank builds to help with control. It helps with it helps with a lot of maps to make sure that you can do the missions very well, even if you don't have a lot of DPS. Like for instance, Undine Soul Advanced gravity wells are extremely good in those maps. And when it comes to general all-purpose stuff, it is one of the better ones in the game. A lot of your super high-end DPS builds won't use gravity well, just because they're bursting out enemies so quickly that it doesn't matter if they're grouping them together. They're already going to be dead so quickly anyway that it's not going to make much of a difference. But for basically anyone else, gravity will be useful to you if you happen to have a Lieutenant Commander Science Bridge Officer seat on your ship, or a Lieutenant Commander Universal that you can afford to make a Science Bridge Officer seat. Our next to last ability is called Photonic Shockwave. If you're going to be in a map where you're defending a target for a long time, like Drinner Gauntlet, this is a very good ability to have on your starship. Actually, on Drinner Gauntlet, I'd probably take Photonic Shockwave over Gravity Well, actually, just because it has such a strong repel. Like, it's got a 37 repel, which I just talked about earlier that Tractor Repulsors was strong with like a 3 repel. This has a 37 repel. It's like 10 times stronger. It's very, very, very strong. Plus, it has a couple second disable too, and you can use this every 45 seconds. Assuming you don't have any things that are reducing cooldowns even further. By the way, your deflector ability stuff off of Gravity Well also affects Photonic Shockwave. So you gotta have the same duty officers and have a lot of stuff with this to help with this being spammed quicker. Yeah, if you're gonna try to do Junior Gauntlet on Elite, I would suggest everyone to have Photonic Shockwave in order to be able to get through it. But that's just me personally. Outside of that, I mean, like it's fairly straightforward. Strong repel, strong disable. It also interrupts abilities, so this can potentially be used in PvP as well. It's very situational, and you have to know that you have some enemies that are going to be doing a lot of over time damaging stuff to enemies, or going to use stuff like extend shields. This is one of the few abilities, to my knowledge, that will interrupt the ability to extend shields. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, alongside that, that's basically it. My last ability for this is an ability called Viral Matrix. Of all the abilities in this list, this is the only one that I couldn't find a really strong justification to use it. It's pretty clear that it's supposed to be for PvP. It's got a very long disable. I mean, a 13.5 second disable on a 60-second cooldown is pretty substantial, and this is without any enhancements to your ship because it's just on the ground. And space, if you have more EPG and control, this will become even more substantial than this. It's true that you can use abilities like engineering team and science team to counter it. And it's really because of those counters that I'm not really sure when you really want to use this thing, because I don't know. I mean, at the high end for PvP, people are going to be using a lot of these types of abilities, like, and waiting for their ship to get disabled, and then they'll use them and get out of those disables. I don't know. Feel free to talk in the comments and just let me know if you can see a justification for this. I mean, it's definitely supposed to be a very strong ability, pretty strong for disables of subsystems, because you can't access it until Lieutenant Commander Science, so it's definitely something, you know. And obviously the rank 3 is twice as powerful as the rank 1. I don't know. I would prefer other abilities over this one personally, but then again, I'm not a science DPS person. I'm a tank player that happens to play tank for both general playstyles. So that's just me. Feel free to mention in the comments what you like. But other than that, that's basically it for the beginning of this series anyway. In January, I'll go ahead and start talking more about other bridge option abilities in space, and then start tackling ground. And then I'll start giving my suggested ground team after I've done all the rest of my bridge officer abilities for space and ground. But yeah, hopefully y'all have enjoyed these couple of first little videos. If you're not a captain that's going to be using a tier 6 starship, these first 3 videos here are going to be completely sufficient for all the stuff you're ever going to need for space combat. Just because, unless you have a tier 6 starship, you're not going to have the specialization bridge officer abilities available to you. But anyway, hopefully you all enjoyed this and found some use in these first few videos for this series. And yeah, thank you all for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.